Moonlighter 2 is an indie roguelite that lets you wield the most dangerous magic known to mankind: capitalism. You dive into monster-infested ruins not to save the world, but rather to grab every shiny object that isn't nailed down so you can resell it at your cozy little shop. The big twist is that Moonlighter 2 is actually 3 games stapled together. It's a fast-paced action-roguelite, an inventory management puzzle game, and a shop sim where you have to convince people to buy burnt sticks and old wires for absurd prices. It's honestly a ridiculous setup, but it is also a lot of fun. So let me show you how Moonlighter 2 juggles all of this at once, and what happens when a ball inevitably hits the floor. I have never played the original Moonlighter, so I cannot do any comparisons, but what I can say is that Moonlighter 2 stands perfectly fine on its own. Aside from a brief moment of confusion over a man seemingly permanently fused to a chair, I had no trouble getting into it. So, how does the actual gameplay work? Well, before you can start turning violence into profit, you'll need to pick one of 4 weapon types. A short sword that lets you spin to win, a Monster Hunter styled longsword that needs constant sharpening, a spear that fires magical shrapnel, or, if you want to go full primal, punching gloves that make you really angry. And yes, that is their actual ability. And if you're a connoisseur of pain and want a true challenge, you can also go for the broom. A joke weapon whose only power is that you can use it to sweep the floors of your shop after you get your teeth kicked in from trying to fight robots with a broom. Regardless of what you pick, the combat is fast-paced and chaotic. You're usually surrounded by groups of enemies with very different attack patterns, and getting through a room without getting singed, slammed, or sent flying is trickier than it might sound. But, and I have to emphasize this, it is never unfair. The enemy attacks have very long, very obvious telegraphs, so when you get hit, you'll need to perform some serious mental gymnastics to pretend it was not your fault. It also helps that your dodge roll is honestly kind of ridiculous. There's no cooldown, so if you want, you can roll around like you're Sonic and do circles around enemies while they desperately sprint after you, slam into walls, or fall into pits due to sheer confusion. And because the game knows you're this mobile, a lot of attacks are designed to make you panic and chain dodges just to survive. Put all of this together and you get the kind of game where, early on, you'll spend a lot of time eating dirt and falling off the map. But once you get into the rhythm and actually learn the enemy patterns, you'll be able to practically dance around them. And honestly, that's the sort of thing I love. Not the dancing, mind you, but the very noticeable, oh wow, I'm actually improving sort of difficulty curve. Right now there are 3 worlds you can explore. A robotic gallery full of strange artifacts, a searing wasteland inhabited by hostile shrubbery, and a magical realm seemingly frozen in time. All 3 zones have 2 variants, each of which comes with slightly different enemies, reshuffled visuals, and, most importantly, new bosses. The bosses are easily my favorite part of the combat, as they are the very epitome of the challenging but fair philosophy. If you try to button mash your way through them, you'll get punted back to town before you even realize what happened. But if you're patient and actually learn their moves, you can get through the entire fight without taking even a single hit. And it was during one of these fights that I ran into my only real issue with the combat. The lock-on range is just a bit too short, especially if you're using fists. I frequently found myself shadowboxing the air in front of enemies, and even after adjusting to it, the targeting never felt completely trustworthy. Now, Moonlighter 2 is still in early access, so this isn't a deal breaker by any stretch, but it is definitely something I hope gets tweaked soon, because it really undercuts that whole get angry, get punching flow the fists are really built around. And speaking of flow, Moonlighter 2 is just a very pleasant game. It's one of those games that feels cozy even while you're ripping and tearing your way through the levels. The enemies are adorable, the environments are bright and colorful, and the whole adventure can best be described as charming. The soundtrack nails that vibe too. Most of the tracks are atmospheric and upbeat, and even the boss themes, which are more orchestral, still skew towards being whimsical rather than dramatic. They're not the kind of "prepare for your doom" type of songs, but rather chill background music for exploring, selling, or in my case, writing a script. Besides jamming out to music once you've cleared out an area, you'll also be able to pick your next stop on a Slay the Spire style map. Each branch throws something different at you. More loot to sell back in town, a mini-boss that wants to show you his ball collection, and even a handful of temporary upgrades so you can really put in the hurt. These upgrades range from simple damage increases to fancy effects that let you ignite enemies or cover them in explosive glue. Now it is worth saying, Moonlighter 2 does not have deep build crafting. You're not going to be assembling a Rube Goldberg machine that will eventually one-shot the final boss. You only get a handful of upgrades per run, but that's usually enough to make each attempt feel a little bit different, especially once you start swapping between the weapon variants. Each of the 4 weapon classes comes with 4 sub-weapons, and they're actually distinct. The spear, for example, can fire shrapnel that you can then recoil to impale enemies from behind. Or you can use the version where the shards orbit you like a deadly hula hoop made out of surprisingly tasty looking shrapnel candy. It's not the deepest roguelite system out there, but it's punchy, fast, and entertaining, and honestly, that's all it needs to be when it's only 1/3 of the game. The second third is the inventory puzzle game, which is the one that got my attention the hardest. Every time you clear a treasure room, an elite, or a boss, you're handed a chest or 2 filled with 2 common items and 1 rare. Each item has a random level that determines its value, and it's your job to merge, fuse, burn, zap, or otherwise finagle these objects into becoming the most disgustingly overpriced junk ever imagined. But there is a catch. There's a lot of items out there, and even after upgrading, your inventory is rather tiny. On top of that, many items only function when pointed in a specific direction, so you're constantly juggling what to keep, what to ditch, and where to cram it all so it doesn't explode or just make everything worse. As you might imagine, this starts off very easy, but by the time you have 15 trinkets that each require their own special triggers, you end up with a shockingly dynamic and really addictive game of inventory Tetris. I'm not joking about that either. I have spent an embarrassing amount of time rearranging little baubles and burnt branches because the thought of leaving a dungeon without squeezing out the biggest possible number physically hurts my soul. And I think that's Moonlighter 2's greatest achievement. It takes loot, the most taken for granted part of every single game, and it turns it into an actual puzzle, but without making it so overcomplicated it overshadows the action. Once you've hoarded enough treasure to make a dragon feel financially insecure, it's time to head back to town and unload it all in your very cozy little shop. This is the simplest and, if I'm being honest, the weakest third of Moonlighter 2. There just isn't much strategy to it. Once you know the going rates of items is just an endless cycle of sell the cheap stuff first to unlock temporary bonuses and then cash out your high value items. Decorations that come with their own perks do add some extra spice, but the core loop never really evolves beyond putting the item down, setting the price, and then giving the customer the death stare until they pay up. That's not to say it isn't satisfying. Pulling off big combos and closing off for the night with 100,000 gold in your pocket feels fantastic. It's just that the act of selling lacks a bit of oomph. There's no haggling, there's no tricks, or even the risk of someone trying to snag your goods and then sprinting for the door. But again, it is early access, so there is plenty of room for this system to grow and expand. I would love to see future updates turn this part of the game into its own little economy with ups and downs. But what do you actually do with all of that money? The answer is permanent upgrades, and a lot of them. Out of all the roguelites I've played this year, Moonlighter 2 has the widest spread of upgrades by far. There are 8 different shops offering all sorts of stat boosts, perks, and weapon improvements, many of which are genuinely powerful. So if you're the type of player who loves watching numbers go up, be careful as Moonlighter 2 might just give you an overdose. And to be clear, I do like what the game is doing. From a purely gameplay perspective, the upgrades are very fun to chase and very satisfying to stack. And it's also nice to have an actual use for all of that gold. The problem is what they do to the difficulty curve. My first few runs were a real struggle, the kind where I was sweating bullets and praying that the next room does not end up being my last. But after 15 hours of upgrades, the challenge just evaporates. At this point, I don't think I can lose a run unless I decide to play with my monitor turned off. Now this might sound like a huge issue, but honestly, it's one of the easiest problems in the world to fix. Just add another difficulty level. And honestly, that's kind of the story of Moonlighter 2. It's a great core gameplay loop that just needs a few loose bolts tightened up. So with all of that said, would I recommend Moonlighter 2? If you're a fan of casual roguelites, absolutely. Right now it's still in early access, so it's not the deepest or the most complex thing out there, but it is a chill, charming, and entertaining adventure all the way through. It took me around 15 hours to run out of things to do, and for the very first version, I think that's a perfectly respectable amount of content. So if the updates keep building on what's already here and really polish things up, Moonlighter 2 might end up sweeping way more than just the shop floors. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, a like and a sub would go a long way, and I do hope to see you again soon. Bye bye!